What a joy it is to introduce Professor Gourley. He's amazingly accomplished. He seems to be very proud of being the editor of the Yellowstone History Journal, because that's the first thing he brought up when I asked him. Good Lord. He likes a diverse selection of topics. American history, Yellowstone National Park, the Civil War, the national parks, presidents, Montana and religion. He's also a photographer and has won awards. But today I believe we are going to witness his opus, because he is combining my two favorite sources, for those of you who know me, foodways and ephemera. And for those of you who don't know ephemera, the word essentially means it shouldn't be here. If your mom made you clean underneath the bed and you had to throw all those great programs out, she was making you throw history out. So with that said, foodways and the evolution of evolution of restaurant food, should I say?
Sure.
Okay. The evolution of food in Yellowstone, Montana. Thank you so much. This is Professor Gourley.
May I ask you to bring me a water bottle? I'm sorry, I forgot. The water bottle is sitting at my table.
I'm sorry, say again. You want the
The
bottle?
water bottle. Would you mind grabbing that?
Not at all.
Thank you. Hey, Bruce. Yes, sir. All right. The heckling section. Hello, everyone. It's good to see you. We've already had. Thank you. We've already had such a wonderful conference so far. And just this morning alone, let's see what I have learned about food, in addition to the fine meals we've had here. I learned that there were Red Lodge peas. I did not know this. And I also learned from Fred Woody, he's in here somewhere, about Adam Horn Miller, who was an early explorer, and who, in Fred's own words, if I recall correctly, was Montana's meanest person. And then later on in the presentation, Fred just kind of made a note of, oh, by the way, he was famous for his biscuits. And so I'm thinking, does this mean he made a mean biscuit? So here we are eating wonderful food at this conference. We don't have menus. The food is great. But can you recall a time in the past? Can you recall how many times you have held a menu in your hand and you've pondered the possibilities on that menu? It's more than mere words. The items, the words on that menu, perhaps as you're holding a menu at a restaurant somewhere, you're thinking that you need comfort food, for example. So you're looking down the list of items for something that may, satisfy that longing, if you will. Or perhaps you're adventuresome and you're looking for something different. And maybe there are things on there you're not even sure what the words mean necessarily. Maybe you ask the waiter for more information. There are many possibilities when it comes to menus. And so today, my focus is on Yellowstone menus in particular. Menus from the early part of the 20th century, roughly, in the case of what we will see of menus today, literally, the images we'll see, from the 19-teens through the 1940s, which seems to have been the golden age of menus in Yellowstone. By the 50s, the formatting of the menus has changed somewhat. They look different at that point. So, Bites of History, vintage menus from Yellowstone National Park, focusing on the hotel dining rooms in particular, not the lodges, but the dining rooms. This was an image we just saw of the Old Faithful dining Okay, I've got to get the buttons right. I'm looking for the pointer. There it is. This is the original hotel dining room, the Old Faithful Inn dining room. There's a wall back here. This is called the Old House. Many of you know that. If you walk up to the front desk to ask for a table in the Old Faithful dining room, if you ask for the Old House, this is where you will get a seat. And if you ask for the New House, it's on the other side of what was once a wall and behind the fireplace over there. Much of it looks familiar to us today, as a matter of fact, what we see in this image, except the tables are a bit different and the arrangement of the chairs around the tables. There were more like communal type meals back then. This is an old image of the Lake Hotel dining room. It's a bit fancier than the Old Faithful Inn dining room. And when we talk about menus today, of course, I'll be talking about food, but there'll be much more than just food that we talk about, that I mention, that I cover. There are images on many of these menus that we will look at, and the images tell stories themselves. The menus are, sure, they're about food, they're also about culture. Dining is a cultural experience, and menus reflect that as well. They tell us stories. And at times, Yellowstone National Park, hotel concessionaires operating the dining rooms used that space on a menu to promote other activities to tourists, to visitors as well. And so I'll talk a good bit about context as we go along and talk about dining in Yellowstone. In some introductory context, in this era I'm speaking of, in which we will talk about menus, there were 2 world wars, there was an economic boom, and there was a Great Depression. There was nothing going on. It was some of the most unsettled in many ways in time of the 20th century in some respects, from great highs to great lows, including wars afar that we were involved in. Visitation grew dramatically during this time from roughly, and these are rough numbers, about 19,000 around 1910 to about 1.1 million on the eve of World War II. And that is in the sense that we were involved in World War II. That is dramatic growth over that period of time. And it's reflected in the hotels and dining rooms as well. The roads were dirt at the beginning. By the 30s, they're being paved. And so by the end of the time, the main roadways around the park are paved. People were able to move around the park much more efficiently than in the past, and many more people are moving around as well. National highways are developed. Before national highways were developed, it could be an adventure just getting to Yellowstone. Many people took the trains, of course. It was the main mode of transportation to the park. But even in the early days of automobiles, before national highways emerged in the mid-teens and then were expanded and improved, literally improved on their surfacing and so forth, getting across country could be adventuresome in early automobiles. Trains, stagecoaches, and automobiles. I just think that sounds like a great name for a movie one day. is the story of transportation in the park in many ways. And then throughout this time period, there were renovations and/or additions to all the major hotels in the park during this time. So this is some background information of what's going on. Some menu credits. I started collecting digital images of menus, found them from various places, but there are several people I want to recognize, institutions. The University of Wyoming, Emmett D. Chisholm Special Collections, and thanks to Tamsin Hurt especially for acquiring a number of menus from which I was able to choose from. Jack and Sue Davis, many of you know Jack and Sue Davis, wonderful collectors, and they were supplied some from their collection as well. And Larry and Thea Lancaster down in Oklahoma, from their collection, supplied a number as well. And then the Museum of the Yellowstone, with Yellowstone Historic Center in West Yellowstone as well. I had planned on looking other places. I didn't know how many I would find, but by the time they had sent me digital images, I had more than enough. And so it's wonderful to know that there are still many of the menus that exist, that someone has them somewhere in collections and that they are being digitized. So thank you to all who have contributed many of the images you'll see today. I want to start with the Fountain Hotel. I think it's safe to say no one in here ever had a chance to stay in the Fountain Hotel. And if you did, I would like to talk with you. I would like to hear your stories. The Fountain Hotel near Lower Geyser Basin, you will see in this image here, you get the pointer, leather pool. If you look closely, it may be hard to see in the glare, I don't know, but there's a pipe right here. If you look closely, and if you follow this right here, it goes up to the hotel. This is a treed area now. This little hill is a treed area now. But if you still to this day, if you look closely from the right angle, driving south to north, over to your right once you pass Leather Pool, and around the time you get to Leather Pool, if you look just right, you will see that indentation in the grass to the present day. So they piped, and Europeans love this. They love mineral waters. They love to bathe in mineral waters, especially Europeans did. And so they piped the mineral water from Leather Pool to the Fountain Hotel for people to bathe in. If you can imagine doing that back then. For therapeutic purposes, some would say. But that lasted for a while. It would be a season. It would last for a season or time, if you will, in Yellowstone. And that use of the thermal waters did go away eventually. Fountain Hotel opened in 1891. In 1916, it fell on hard times as stagecoaches after that year exited the park, and as many of you know this story, horse-pulled stagecoaches could only travel so far in a given day, and so hotels developed along the way at the appropriate places for the horses to stop for the evening. And Fountain Hotel was the place that folks stopped at from 1891 to 1916 in their stagecoach travels, as they left Mammoth and headed south. And once the stagecoaches exited and the touring buses and the automobiles came to have the roads to themselves, motorized vehicles then, that is, there was somewhat less of a need for a hotel at Lower Geyser Basin, or near Lower Geyser Basin, that area right there. And so the hotel sat unused for a while after that, until my understanding it was torn down not by 1927, and it is no more. It was a nice hotel, as you can tell, from the images, just from this one image here. So we start with a menu from a hotel that no longer exists in the park, and it is the Fountain Hotel. On the left, you will see an image of a menu that says breakfast near the top. That's the Fountain Hotel above the word breakfast. And I'm going to, so I realize that the print on the menus is somewhat small. I won't read everything. I will highlight certain things from the menu and tell some stories about the food and some cultural context and a little park history and so forth. But I wanted to do a comparison to start with, and that is comparing a early Yellowstone Hotel menu, and this was the earliest one I did acquire to use, with a 1900 Northern Pacific Railway menu. You can see some similarities in the layout of these menus. Of course, the Northern Pacific carried passengers to the park where they got on stagecoaches and toured around the park. You might expect some similarities, as the Northern Pacific had a hand in the park concessions as well. So this is just kind of a side-by-side visual comparison of a time when menus were fairly fancy, some 100+ years ago, in an experience in and of themselves. And this next one is also a comparison. On the right is the lunch menu, the last lunch menu from the Titanic. From the Titanic. Have you ever wondered what the last lunch was for those who did not survive the Titanic sinking. Well, this is it, this menu right here. It strikes me that it's not as fancy as the Yellowstone menu, just appearance-wise, but the menu was a menu for, well, folks who were moneyed. This menu was on the Titanic. And Yellowstone's hotel dining rooms are also about serving moneyed people in those early days. These were not ordinary menus necessarily. They had foods that people with money would expect to have presented to them via menu to choose from, if you will. There are many meats on both of these menus, a tremendous amount of meats, including salmon mayonnaise from the Titanic, potted shrimps, Norwegian anchovies, soused herrings, plain and smoked sardines. Boy, there's a lot of fish there. Roast beef, round of spiced beef. I've got to look at my screen. That's a little too blurry. I'm too close to it. Veal and ham pie and ham, various kinds of ham, bologna sausage, chicken and ox tongue. Surely there's a meat there for something for everyone. And there are quite a few also on the Yellowstone menu. So let's start with breakfast at the Fountain Hotel. One of the items on this 1913 menu from the Fountain Hotel is Tokay grapes, if I'm saying that right. They are of Hungarian origins. These grapes are. I looked online into newspapers from 1913 through Chronicling America, such a great resource to find out how much they were selling for at the time. 10 to 15 cents. They were typically selling for £1 at that time. And so that's near the top of the menu, and on the top right image is an advertisement, somewhere in the vicinity of that era for these grapes. And for purposes of this particular presentation about Yellowstone, it's right in the sense that there's a bear in this image, and he's floating a banner that says B-A-R-E. Bear floating a bear banners for Bear Fruit Company, marketing Tokay grapes. The Northern Pacific, there's an article here from 1913 from the Northern Pacific about Yellowstone National Park. Northern Pacific is advertising for new clientele for their passenger service to Yellowstone, and they speak of Yellowstone as having sumptuous hotels, 143 miles of coaching over government roads through scenery and wonders unique in all the world, fishing, glorious outdoor life, helpful recreation. In 1913, as these folks came to Yellowstone, stagecoached around the park, stayed and dined in the hotels. Among the menu items they had at the Fountain Hotel for breakfast also were grape nuts, which were not as ubiquitous as we might think of them today, perhaps. They also had what was commonly referred to back then. We don't quite say it this way today. We just say bacon. But back then, breakfast bacon. And in the 1910s, breakfast bacon, as we think about in the stores, was not quite it's not quite the same as it was back then. It had not been packaged and quickly sliced and put in stores back then. It was cut up, processed, if you will, into bacon strips on site. And so it was before what we might think of as commoditized bacon. So breakfast bacon here in 1913, and it would not be commoditized, breakfast bacon, until the 1920s through Oscar Mayer, if I recall correctly. The image to the right below the grape image is assured eggs, if I'm saying this right. And it is a mixture of eggs put into this bowl and baked. And I believe I can see spinach in this particular image of assured eggs. It was a very common dish back then. I am not sure I have ever been served this dish. It doesn't seem as popular today, or it's not this exact dish anyway. And it's the earliest mention I could find of assured eggs through Chronicling America was 1874. So still fairly new on the American scene. The 1913 Superintendent's Report talked about Yellowstone as having some 12,000 hotel visitors and 213 coaches and supply wagons traveling over roads that were far from suitable, in the words of the superintendent, taking hotel supplies on wagons around the park. We think we have supply issues these days sometimes. At least we have automobiles and we don't have to rely on stagecoaches. And then we go to the Old Faithful Inn as we kind of work our way through some menus here. The Old Faithful Inn, June 29, 1915, and a map of the Haynes Geyser Basin. And this is just as a reference point here right quick. The reference point being that there's a different road that we travel now that folks traveled back then. They would come from the north heading south, past the Midway Geyser Basin, drive around right close to Morning Glory, between the Morning Glory and the river actually, the fire hole. And then they could go right by in front of the Old Faithful Inn to Old Faithful Geyser and keep on going down towards West Thumb. Or there was a stage road right here which would take you to see things like Punch Bowl and Black Sand Basin. So that's that's a different route than we know today. But as folks traveled, that's what the route. And this route was into the 1970s, is my understanding, that the road went by Morning Glory. On this night, June 29, 1915 menu, trout from Shoshone Lake is on the menu. It's a lightly breaded trout dish, sauteed in butter, and pineapple ice cream. Pineapple ice cream. As far as I can tell, this probably was not actually pineapple flavored ice cream. It was ice cream molded in the shape of a pineapple. Okay, many years before this, pineapples had become kind of a social status thing in America. People rented pineapples to display them in their homes. It was a sign you had a lot of money. They were very exotic. People couldn't afford to buy them, but they could rent them and show them off. And then you turned the pineapple back in and someone else rented it. But here, pineapple is still showcased, in this case, as pineapple-shaped ice cream, and this is a pineapple mold we're looking at right here. In 1915, there were expositions, world expositions on the West Coast. There were two: the Panama Pacific International Exposition at San Francisco and the Panama California Exposition at San Diego. In San Francisco, there was a replica of the inn in a display there. Coast-to-coast highway traffic was taking place during this year. And there was so much pressure from motorists going coast to coast en route to the expos in California to go ahead and to finally open Yellowstone up to automobile traffic that the Park Service and the concessionaires who were in control of transportation finally relented and let the first automobile in on August the 1st, 1915. And you will see here at the bottom, this is August the 1st, 1915, an early automobile. This day, automobiles admitted to Yellowstone National Park for the first time. And a special menu made to commemorate this historic event. This is from the Mammoth Hotel, and this menu on this August 1st, 1915, the top right is an image of a finger bowl. Historically, in America, this was something you would find in fine restaurants. Elite folks would use to wash their fingers between the main course and dessert, for example. And one early definition, and I think this was late 1800s or early 1900s, I drew this definition from, is that the finger bowl was known as the comma between the main course and dessert. It often included a lemon or a lemon wedge in the bowl itself. It's kind of a cleansing agent as well. The images on portrayed at Mammoth are somewhat indicative. Interestingly enough, the images at the top of this Mammoth Hotel have nothing to do with Mammoth. Now, on the left-hand side is a picture of the lounge, but the images of nature are, well, they're geysers. They're giant and Old Faithful geyser from the Upper Geyser Basin. This is because even at the Mammoth Hotel, they know what people want to see, and so they are featured on the menus. Here is that image of the hotel, the Mammoth Hot Springs Hotel, the lounge looking toward the lobby. At the time, a magnificent lounge it was. Yes. Did I do the wrong one? Okay, well. Okay, so the Tamsin is the expert on the Kenyon Hotel. So not only do they have nothing about the Mammoth Hotel on this menu. I mean, nothing. That tells us something. July the 4th, 1919. This is the old. This is from the Old Faithful Inn. It has an image of a bear in the middle. Let me go back. Right, a little image of a bear in the middle. The end's at the top. Old Faithful Geyser looks like to the left over there. This is the original inn. July the 4th. The Great War had recently ended the previous year. Visitation surges. And in 1919, as folks were celebrating and moving around, and there are no more stagecoaches, which means quicker access to hotels if you're distributing food to the hotels. And if you're traveling, it's easier to move around the park as well. Note the bear. The bear does become a fixture on other menus as well. And I cannot forget this. Note, this is a postcard image. And Jack and Sue and Larry and Thea Lancaster tell me that postcard menu images were not typical. There were some. They're not as easy to find these days as regular hotel menus. But you would walk away from your dining experience with a menu and a postcard combined. A postcard that you could potentially save for yourself or send to a friend with a note. Here is the lunch menu at the Old Faithful Inn. There's pineapple ice. It's phrased this time. And pineapple ice typically would have referred to an ice treat similar to ice cream but minus the eggs, is my understanding. Pineapple ice. Halibut and pork. Some of the menu items that were commonplace are on this menu here. Halibut is common on early Yellowstone menus. When we go to a restaurant today, if they're serving fresh halibut, that is a treat these days. Halibut was common back then. And alongside halibut, they had pork and beans. They do go together so well. There was Scotch mutton broth as well, consisting of mutton neck, turnips, carrots, onion, barley, and garnish of fresh parsley. That's not something we see on menus much today. They did have iced tea for those who like iced tea. There's the bear, enlarged. Here's the Mammoth Hotel, 3 years later, July the 4th, another July celebration. A little fancier this menu is. It has the bear, we have a geyser, and this Mammoth Hotel menu, again, at least what we're seeing right now, shows no evidence that the visitor is actually at Mammoth, but it does highlight two of the three sites tourists most wanted to see. Old Faithful, a bear, the third being what? The Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. The inside of this menu, this July the 4th, 1922, which was the 50th anniversary year of the park. They had celebrations around the park. they had historic reenactments that season as well, but on this particular day, they had a number of festivities, including a baseball game. Baseball was commonly played in the park among those who worked in the park at that time, rangers and concessions workers as well. And so there was a morning baseball game that this menu is letting folks know between transportation employees and rangers. There were foot races, 25 yards, 50 yards, foot races, also early afternoon. And something that I'm not sure exactly what it would have involved, but trick races as well taking place. There were motor cars leaving for the hot springs and terraces to carry those around that near the hotel there, around those thermal features of the park, those hot springs. And there was a prize masquerade ball in the hotel lobby at night. So there were many activities July the 4th, 1922, as the menu makes certain to tell. One of the menu items on this particular menu is Martha Washington pie. Has anyone heard of Martha Washington pie? This was jelly cake baked in a pie tin. The origins seem to go back to the 1850s, as far as I've been able to tell, according to Sarah Wasberg Johnson, who is a food historian. So it's not really a cake. It's not really a pie as much as it is a cake, and it has been known by many other names as well, according to Wasberg. Here we have Old Faithful Inn, an Old Faithful Inn lunch menu on July 30th, 1922. In the 1920s, I wanted to see what were some popular foods and how this was reflected in this menu from 1922 from the Old Faithful Inn, because the menu mentioned there are cookies available and there are muffins available. I mean, we eat cookies and muffins today. So the top cookies in the 1920s, well, sadly, there were no chocolate chip cookies because chocolate chips were not yet around. Wouldn't take another decade or so. One resource listed orange drop as a popular cookie, but I actually looked up in Chronicling America, and there were only 2 mentions ever about orange drop cookies. So I think someone had some kind of motive in trying to say that orange drop cookies were popular. But chocolate cookies were. Molasses cookies as well. Ginger, and then sugar cookies. Sugar cookies by far the biggest. As to muffins, plain muffins were in fashion, blueberry muffins as well. Date muffins. Has anyone had a date muffin? I don't think I have. Cornmeal muffins, graham muffins, rice muffins were very popular, and bread muffins as well. Somewhat of a different selection that we are familiar with today. At the bottom on the right, the menu, on the bottom of the right, I put an illustration here with a yellow bus to illustrate the tours that were being offered at this time in the 1920s by the Park Service for folks being sold and offered by folks staying at the hotels. According to this menu under luncheon, there's a note here. If you were here in the 1920s eating lunch at the Yellowstone, at the Old Faithful Inn, see transportation agent for motor trips to Black Sand Basin, Lone Star, Geyser, Jackson Hole, and Teton Mountains. And by the way, finger bowls are served upon request, should you wish a finger bowl. And now here is the back side, the postcard side of a menu from this July 30th, 1922 menu that someone, a diner, filled out and sent to someone, to her mother. Dear mother, the most beautiful part of our trip was, okay, I have to do this. The most beautiful part of our trip was seen yesterday and today. This is where we were stopping Sunday and Monday. We leave here tomorrow morning for home. Expect to see you soon. Love, Bess. To her mom. Here's another July the 4th menu. I do not know if the fact that I collected so many July the 4th menus is indicative of how popular they were among diners or collectors afterward, or why. But there's a number of July 4th menus. Private automobiles are dominating by now. Travel by rail to Yellowstone is way down by the 1920s. It's a middle class world now, and in this middle class world, there are some items on menus that have become popularized in recent years, and these include bananas, cantaloupe, and breakfast bacon. By now, all popularized. After meal activities, you can see the transportation agent for this. And to assist in serving quickly, guests are requested to give their entire order. So they don't want you, the waitresses don't want you coming back to them time and again to request something different. And of course, there are so many more people visiting the park at this point. Back to the Canyon Hotel, a breakfast menu that has deer on the front cover. I don't know of any actual data on this, but I gather from researching the early 20th century history of the park and reading through superintendent's reports and monthly reports and looking at images and so forth, that there were two animals that were especially popular with tourists in terms of people wanting to pet them. Bears at the very top of the list. Sometimes didn't work so well. But a remarkable number of people, it appears, wanted to pet deer. Deer. What a disparity, bear and deer. So, sun-kissed orange is on the menu. Sun-kissed orange came from California Growers Cooperative, established in 1909, that popularized orange juice, a commoditized orange juice over time. Flannel cakes, a type of pancake that is a term from Appalachia that has Scotch-Irish origins. It's a really fluffy, almost cake-like pancake. It's not a flat cake that we sometimes think of. And then there's an opportunity for an early afternoon drive here as well. Cars leave for Mammoth Hot Springs via Mount Washburn at 1 p.m., leaving from the Canyon Hotel. Don't fail to take this side trip en route from Canyon to Mammoth. The road circles the top of the mountain at an altitude of 10,500 feet, and there's a great panoramic view from the top. They are selling these activities from the hotels on the menus. Here's an Old Faithful menu from June 20th, 1929, as we move towards the 30s and wrap up here. A dinner menu. It has an Italian dish, cream of spinach. There are corn puffs on the menu. Why would you have corn puffs at the Old Faithful Inn years ago? Well, it was the talk of the city. Corn puffs were. A few years before, it became a hot commodity, a popular commodity, and was known, according to this article from the Quaker Oats Company, as the witching food. The witching food. There's also prune whip. Prune whip. Which is made of prune juice and pulp. In the early part of the 20th century, it began as a children's food in which children could get vitamins they needed. And by the 1950s, this menu item is recognized now by some historians as being Dwight D. Eisenhower's favorite dish, if you can imagine. Mammoth Hotel in the 1929, rice fritters on the menu. It is rice fritters. Origins go back to enslaved African Americans in New Orleans. A Sunday morning breakfast from New Orleans that became a menu item otherwise than just breakfast as well. It has some very interesting origins. And there is chocolate cream pie as well, slices of chocolate cream pie. The Old Faithful Inn, August 1st, 1930. Tremendous amount of food. This is after the stock market has crashed in 1929. Al Capone has just opened a soup kitchen in Chicago. There's Linzer Torte, which is a Christmas holiday pastry treat from Austria, considered by some to be the oldest cake in the world. And this is an image of that cake on the bottom right as well. August 6, 1931. This is the menu that got my attention among menus, kind of got me on this trail of menus. When I read of an item on this menu during this Great Depression era, and as a matter of fact, in August 31, by the end of August, several hotels in the park will close for several years because of the Great Depression, but they have a wonderful menu. Look how many items are on this menu. And the item that caught my attention was Saratoga chips. I had never heard of Saratoga chips. Saratoga Springs was a leading resort in the East. There were mineral waters there. People had been going there since the early 1800s. Euro-Americans had, that is, settlers. Since the early 1800s, to relax, to exercise, enjoy the mineral waters, it was where America's upper crust went. There are several stories, but they go something like this. There was a place called Moon's Lake House at Saratoga Springs, and in 1853, an unhappy Cornelius Vanderbilt, who may or may not have been the real person this happened with, according to which story you follow, ordered fried potatoes like he normally does at this restaurant. And the potatoes that came out to him were too thick for his liking, so he sent them back. The waiter, or the cook, a little upset about that, decided he would show Cornelius Vanderbilt, in this case, in this story, and he sliced the potatoes really thin. And he fried them to a crisp, and he sent them out to Vanderbilt, and Vanderbilt loved them. So, a resort in the East, in New York, which would have been utilized by many folks, the same folks who were coming to Yellowstone way out in the wilderness west. Saratoga chips from the east to the west. Saratoga chips would not become commonplace commercialized until a little bit later in the 30s, but in 1931 they were still handmade, not as widely available, kind of an upper crust food to some degree. They were potato chips. Potato chips. Let's see. In 1940, this Canyon Hotel menu. The war in Europe is raging. America's not yet entered the war. Alcohol is being served again, since alcohol was allowed back in the park in the 1930s, and we see a lot more common foods on this particular menu. There are entertainment options as well. There's a concert in the lounge at 4:30 at Canyon, and there's dancing in the lounge at 8:30 as well. And then 1948, our last menu here, at the end of the 40s, modern Yellowstone has arrived. Sit back and have a Manhattan cocktail. There's an economic boom going on, record tourism, and organized auto tours are no more. The bears are still there, but this image is outdated. This is from a hotel garbage dump. Those have gone by the wayside in the World War II era. There are still bear feeding grounds away from the public in which bears are eating human food and which is of no benefit to them really. So have your Manhattan cocktail, enjoy some prime rib, and according to the menu, be sure to visit the gift shop after your meal. Thank you all. I believe there's some time for a few questions or some insights from those of you who may be food historians. I am not a food historian per se, so I welcome insights. We have, I do believe, about 10 minutes. Yes, Rick.
Are the meals included with the hotel stay? Because I don't see prices.
You could.
I took it.
So, yes, you could. And then in 1937, if you were to buy, so thank you, repeat the question. Were meals included with your hotel stay? You could do that. In 1937, I did find a brochure that also noted you could buy individual meals. Breakfast for $1.25, lunch for $1.50, and dinner for $1.50. I should also note the Old Faithful Inn, before World War II, unless you were staying at the Old Faithful Inn, you couldn't walk through those big red doors. It was reserved for clientele who were staying in the park. And only after that World War II era, according to Ruth Quinn, who is the expert on the Old Faithful Inn, the doors were thrown open for commoners, like us, if you will. Yes?
Theodore Roosevelt, when it came out to Western North Dakota in 1883, was a definite fan of Saratoga chips.
Was he really? Theodore Roosevelt, so we're being told, when he came out in 1883 west, being from New York, an elite, was a fan of Saratoga chips. I did not know that. We take those Saratoga chips for granted these days. Anyone else? Yes.
Just an observation, I was interested in the listing of iced tea showing up in 1922, but not before.
So, obviously, I don't have a comprehensive collection of menus, and so I can't say for sure when the first iced tea would have shown up. But that is an interesting point. There are many things I've not touched on these menus. There's just too much, but they are a delight to get some glimpses into what was some time ago.
Are there abattoirs in the park to provide all this fresh?
So they were, for example, so that were there. The bigger question is, where were they getting this from? The food from? Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. So in some cases, the trout caught locally, yes, could be in Yellowstone Lake, could be in Shoshone, could be other plations. But they're bringing meats in. Sometimes some from the west, some from the east. Fish, that are ocean fish, that are not freshwater fish. They're bringing in. They're bringing in sun-kissed oranges from those California orange growers. Bananas. Bananas have not been that common that long, but they're making their way to the wilderness now in Yellowstone. These folks traveling from afar, expecting a fine setting at a table and good food. Well, the hotels, the concessionaires, have to supply this fine food from somewhere else. And in the park, yes, you can fish. But you can't kill the game in the park. You have to go outside of the park. First by carrying by wagons, supplies, and by cars as well. Yes?
There were actually slaughterhouses in the park for cattle, and they would deliver meat to different hotels. And they had to go really fast, and they went at night, because if they stopped too long or it got too hot, grizzly bears were on.
I have seen images of cattle pinned up near the Lake Hotel and other places as well. Do you know how long that lasted in the park?
No,
Yeah. Yes.
Where did they get the chefs? Were they culinary schools?
Oh my, that's another whole question right there. And I don't know. I've not explored that. And that's another. There are so many avenues of exploration of Yellowstone history. And I thought about that. That's another avenue that could be explored. The people in the kitchen who were preparing the food over time. Right here first. Yes.
I wasn't paying enough attention to the date and the hotel. So here's the question.
Okay.
Did they have the same menu at Old Faithful Inn that they had at Mammoth?
They had, no. The menus vary day to day, meal to meal. And they printed them.
Hotel to hotel.
And hotel, that is correct. Now, sometimes they had some food that was included on both, but they were not copying each other per se. So it is a unique meal each time, is maybe one way of saying that.
So were the menus printed?
The menus. I would love to explore that as well. They were printed somewhere in-house, if you will. And as you can tell, they were fine, really nice menus. Thick card stock, 1950s. The menus, I've seen images of menus, and they're being printed on just regular paper. and with a typewriter it looked like. So literally what we see here is kind of that sweet spot in vintage menus, from what I can tell in the story of Yellowstone. And there were souvenirs. Yes?
I'm guessing iced tea was, came along when they figured out how to make ice cubes. Whenever that was.
Ice, yeah, shaved ice cubes. I have not explored the history of iced tea. I'll have to confess. And of course, there are many kinds of iced tea. It turns out. Here first, yes.
Did you say there was just one concessionaire that took care of all the hotels? Or is it multiple concessionaires?
So there was a hotel. There was a corporation that handled the hotels. There were name changes throughout time. There were also lodges and camps, which I've not focused on as well. And so there's a whole story behind that as well. Tamson, yes, you may have comment, or what might you have to tell us?
So iced tea was introduced in 1904 at the St. Louis Exposition.
Ah, okay.
That's something I learned from the centennial of Old Faithful Inn.
1904, the very year that Old Faithful Inn opened. I did not know this.
The company, the Yellowstone Park Company, had a printing press for the menus. I can't remember the other questions, but those are some.
Right, right. I actually talked with someone recently who said that either I think it was her grandfather had worked as one of the printers in his job in the park. Yes. Anyone else? We have maybe another minute or two.
Did you ever see mention of bison being eaten?
I did not, and I don't think they would be doing that. I mean, game-wise.
Ranches with the bison.
Right. I'm unaware, but then again, most of the menus I've not seen. I mean, there were 3 a day for each of those properties for years and years. Yes.
Bison population crashed to almost extinction.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
I just have a question here. How many of us in this room have stayed in or eaten in the old Canyon Hotel?
Ah, any hands? Anybody? I see a few hands. Over here. What do you remember? It was lovely. Do you remember what you ate in the old Canyon Hotel? Okay. Okay. Yes. That's it. Yes. So I'm sure it was wonderful, whatever it was you ate at the Canyon Hotel. Yes. Yes. Rick.
Did you come across anything bizarre, unexpected on the menu?
Bizarre. A lot of, maybe bizarre is not the right word, but I will confess I came across a lot of French foods, most of which I would have not known how to pronounce, and I did not even try. But there was a definite French influence, European French influence upon in the hotels, in the hotel dining rooms in the park, quite a bit, and other nationalities as well. I think our time is up. I understand there'll be some announcements. Yes. So I'll turn the microphone over to you.